I got the email on Tuesday, just sitting there in my inbox between a camera equipment sale notification and spam about enlarging body parts I'm perfectly fine with. The subject line said, Millbrook, coordinates attached. No sender name I recognized. I almost deleted it. Probably would have if I hadn't been so bored. 3 months since my last decent assignment and my bank account was feeling it. So I opened it. The most haunting shots you'll ever take, it said. That was it. Just those 7 words and a set of GPS coordinates. No signature, no explanation. I Googled the coordinates. Millbrook, Missouri. Old mining town, abandoned in the 80s when the silver ran out. I'd heard photographers talk about it. One of those forgotten places where nature was slowly reclaiming what people left behind. I sat there for a while, cursor hovering over delete. Then I checked my calendar. Empty. Completely empty. I packed my gear that night. The drive took most of Thursday. 6 hours of highway, then county roads, then barely there dirt tracks that made my Subaru's suspension earn its keep. My GPS kept insisting I'd arrived when all I could see were trees and more trees. But then, the road curved, and suddenly there it was. A collapsed water tower was the first thing I spotted, twisted metal sprawled across what must have been the town square. I parked near it and just sat for a minute, taking it in. The silence hit me first. Not quiet, silence. Complete absence of sound except for my car engine ticking as it cooled. I grabbed my Nikon and stepped out. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, pressing against my skin. I chalked it up to the humidity and started walking. The town wasn't big. Main Street ran about 4 blocks with the typical small-town layout. Bank, general store, post office, a couple other brick buildings with faded signs. Beyond that, I could see scattered houses climbing up a gentle slope. The whole place had that sepia-toned quality, like an old photograph come to life. I started shooting. The bank first, solid brick building with columns that were probably impressive once. Now the roof had partially caved in and plants grew through cracks in the steps. I took wide shots, detail shots, played with the light streaming through broken windows. Something felt off, though. I couldn't place it at first, but as I moved from building to building, it hit me. No birds, no insects, no squirrels or mice or any of the creatures that usually inhabit abandoned places. Just wind whistling through broken windows and doors hanging off hinges. "Hello?" I called out once, instantly feeling stupid. The word fell flat, like the air swallowed it. I kept shooting. Post office next, then what looked like it had been a diner. I was getting some great material, decay and desertion captured in perfect afternoon light. After about an hour, I stopped to check what I had on my camera's LCD screen. That's when I saw it. I was flipping through shots of the bank, and there, in the doorway, stood a figure, dark coat, maybe a trench coat, just standing there, watching. But there hadn't been anyone there when I took the picture. I was absolutely sure of it. I looked up quickly at the actual bank building about 50 yards away. Empty doorway. No one. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. Nothing. I zoomed in on the LCD screen. The figure was blurry, indistinct. Could be a shadow, maybe, or a smudge on the lens. I checked my lens. Clean. I took another photo of the bank from the same spot. Reviewed it. No figure. "Weird light trick," I muttered, but my heart was beating faster. I walked over to the bank, climbed the crumbling steps, and looked inside. Nothing but debris and dust motes floating in the sunbeams. I moved on to the residential area, trying to shake off the uneasiness. The houses were in worse shape than the main street buildings. Several had partially collapsed, and one had sunk about 3 feet into the ground on one side, giving it a drunken, tilted appearance. That tilted house drew me in. The windows were intact on the upper floor, which was unusual. I found one around the side that was broken and climbed through, careful of the glass. Inside, it was like time had stopped. Furniture still in place. Couch, coffee table, TV from the early 80s. Family photos on the walls, though I couldn't make out the faces through the thick layer of dust. A coffee mug sat on an end table, like someone had just put it down and walked away. I took dozens of shots, moving from room to room. The kitchen still had plates in the cupboards. Bedrooms upstairs had clothes in the closets. It was eerie, like the people had vanished in the middle of their lives. I was getting great material, though, the kind of urban exploration shots that would sell. Maybe this trip wasn't a waste after all. After finishing with the house, I sat on the front steps and reviewed the images. And there it was again. The figure, in the background of a living room shot, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, in another by the stairs. Each time, in places I had just been or was about to go. I scrolled back and forth between images. The figure was clearer now. Definitely a person in a long dark coat. Tall. I couldn't make out a face. It was always in shadow or turned away. I looked around the empty street, suddenly aware of how alone I was. No one knew I was here. Cell service had disappeared miles back. I took a deep breath and stood up. Imagination playing tricks. Had to be. But I found myself walking faster as I moved to the next house, camera clutched tightly in my hands. I headed to the next house, keeping my camera ready. My unease was growing, but I tried to brush it off. I mean, abandoned towns are supposed to be creepy, right? That's why I was getting good shots. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The second house was in better shape than the first. The door hung open, so I didn't have to climb through a window this time. I stepped inside and found myself in a small living room with an old couch and a TV cabinet. Dust covered everything, but unlike the first house, this one felt emptier, like someone had taken most of their belongings when they left. I took some photos of the living room, then moved to the dining area. A wooden table with 3 chairs sat under a window. One chair was tipped over. I snapped a few pictures, making sure to get the fallen chair in the frame. Before moving on, I checked my camera display to see how the shots were turning out. That's when I saw it again. The figure in the dark coat standing in the corner of the dining room. I spun around, but the corner was empty, just cobwebs and peeling wallpaper. "What the hell?" I muttered, looking back at my camera. There it was. A tall figure in a long coat, standing where no one had been when I took the picture. I scrolled back through my photos. The figure was in the living room shots too, partially hidden behind the couch, and in the last few pictures from the first house, standing at the top of the stairs. My hands felt cold. I told myself it had to be a camera malfunction, or maybe light leaking into the sensor. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The figure was too consistent, too deliberate in its positioning. I moved to the kitchen, taking pictures more rapidly now. Part of me wanted to just leave, but another part, the photographer in me, needed to document whatever this was. The kitchen was a mess of broken dishes and open cabinets. I took shots of the sink full of decades-old grime, the fridge with its door hanging open, the window above the sink that looked out to the backyard. When I checked these images, my stomach dropped. The figure was in the backyard, facing the kitchen window, like it had been looking in at me. And in another shot, it stood by the back door. I backed away from the door immediately. No way was I going out that way now. I returned to the front of the house, checking my photos as I went. In each new batch, the figure had moved closer to where I was currently standing, or was positioned where I had planned to go next. It was following me, or leading me. I couldn't tell which was worse. Outside, I stood on the front porch, breathing hard. The silence of the town pressed in around me. I looked down the street and spotted a church steeple rising above the trees. The Methodist church, probably. Churches always make for good photos in ghost towns, all those shadows and empty pews. I walked quickly, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Nothing moved in the empty street behind me. The church stood at the end of a short path, its white paint peeling but its structure mostly intact. 2 heavy wooden doors formed the entrance, with a simple cross mounted above them. I pushed against one door, and it groaned open on rusty hinges. Inside, dust motes floated in the beams of light that streamed through the high windows. The floor had buckled in places from years of neglect, but the pews still stood in orderly rows, facing a simple altar at the front. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I took several wide shots of the interior, capturing the contrast between light and shadow. The place had that quiet dignity that abandoned churches always seem to maintain, like they're still waiting for their congregation to return. When I checked my display, I nearly dropped my camera. The figure was sitting in the front pew, head bowed as if in prayer. I jerked my head up and stared at the empty pew. Nothing there. Of course there wasn't. My hands were shaking now. This wasn't a trick of the light or a camera malfunction. This was something else entirely. That's when I noticed the smell. At first, I thought it might be mold or rot from the building itself, but this was different, sharper, more immediate, the smell of fresh decay. I followed the scent to a door beside the altar. It was partly open, revealing a small room beyond, probably where the minister prepared for services. The smell was definitely coming from in there. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The room was small, with a desk and chair, and some hooks on the wall where robes would have hung. But what caught my attention was on the floor. A body. A man, maybe in his 30s, lying face up on the wooden floorboards. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and a professional Nikon camera was still strapped around his neck. But what made me step back was the small, neat hole in the center of his forehead. Dried blood had run down the side of his face. I'd never seen a dead body before. Not like this. My stomach lurched, and I had to swallow hard to keep from throwing up. Once the initial shock passed, I moved closer. The body wasn't old, maybe a day or two. The smell was bad, but not overwhelming. His skin had that waxy look that comes after death, but decomposition was just beginning. With trembling hands, I knelt beside him. Another photographer. Had he gotten the same email I had? I needed to know who he was, needed to call the police, but I knew I had no cell service out here. I hesitated, then reached for his pocket. It felt wrong to go through a dead man's things, but I had to know who he was. His jeans pocket contained a wallet. I flipped it open and found a driver's license. Eli Reynolds from Kansas City. The license had expired just 2 days ago. His birthday. He'd died on or around his birthday. I put the wallet back in his pocket, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here, get to somewhere with phone service. Report this. But as I stood up, I heard something that froze me in place. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, walking across the wooden floor of the chapel. I moved to the doorway and peered out. A man in a dark trench coat stood at the altar with his back to me, just like the figure in my photos. He was tall and thin, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something. My heart pounding, I raised my camera. I don't know why I did it. Instinct, maybe, or the need to prove to myself that this was real. I focused and pressed the shutter. The click seemed impossibly loud in the quiet church. The man turned. His face was gaunt, almost skeletal, with deep-set eyes that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. And he began walking toward me. I didn't even think. I just ran. When that gaunt face turned toward me, something primal kicked in. I bolted through the back door of the minister's office, shoving it hard against the wall. There was a narrow hallway with another door at the end that led outside. I pushed through it and stumbled into the overgrown yard behind the church. My breath came in short bursts as I glanced around, trying to get my bearings. The back of the church faced more abandoned buildings, looked like old shops or businesses. I heard the door I'd just come through bang open behind me, and I didn't bother looking back. I sprinted across the yard, my camera bouncing against my chest. The dead guy, Eli, kept flashing in my mind, that neat little hole in his forehead. I'd seen enough crime shows to know what a gunshot wound looked like. I aimed for what looked like an old hardware store about 50 yards away. The back door hung half open, and I slipped inside, finding myself in a stockroom with empty metal shelving units. Dust covered everything. I crouched behind a counter, trying to quiet my breathing. For a minute, I thought maybe I'd lost him. The silence felt heavy again, that weird, absolute silence I'd noticed when I first arrived. I slowly stood up, thinking I should find a better hiding spot or maybe make my way back to my truck. Then I shifted my weight, and the floorboard under me let out a loud creak. Shit. I froze, listening. Footsteps approached the back door, slow, deliberate steps that didn't try to hide their presence. I looked around frantically and spotted a door that probably led to the main part of the store. I moved quickly but carefully, avoiding the spots that looked like they might make noise. I made it through the door just as I heard someone enter the stockroom. The main store area was bigger than I expected, with rows of empty shelves and a counter with an ancient cash register. There was another door across the room that looked like it might connect to the building next door. I headed for it, keeping low. When I reached it, I turned the handle slowly. It was unlocked. I slipped through and found myself in what must have been a small office supply store. More empty shelves, more dust. But there was something useful here, a hole in the wall where pipes used to run between buildings. It was tight, but I thought I could fit. I squeezed through, scraping my shoulders on the rough edges. My camera got caught for a second, and I had to twist awkwardly to free it. On the other side was what looked like an old clothing store. Mannequin parts were scattered around like something from a horror movie. I moved toward the front of the store, where stairs led to a second floor. I took them quickly, wincing at each small sound. The upper level was one big room with a few tables and chairs, maybe a break room or storage area. Windows looked out over the main street. I crouched by one of the windows and peered out. I could see the man in the trench coat moving between buildings across the street. Even from here, something looked off about him. His movements were too fluid, too purposeful. He paused suddenly and turned his head like he was listening. I ducked down, heart pounding. When I looked again, he was gone. I scanned the street but couldn't see him anywhere. I needed to get back to my truck. It was about 3 blocks away, parked near that collapsed water tower. I found back stairs that led down to what was probably once an employee entrance. The door at the bottom was stuck, but a nearby window had a broken pane large enough for me to climb through. I lowered myself carefully to the ground outside, landing in an alley between buildings. I took a deep breath. No more sneaking around. I needed to make a run for it. I took off at a sprint, no longer caring about noise. I ran down the alley, turned onto the main street, and kept going. My lungs burned and my legs felt heavy, but fear kept me moving. I glanced over my shoulder every few seconds, expecting to see the man in the trench coat right behind me. The 3 blocks felt like 3 miles, but finally I saw my truck. I ran the last 50 feet and grabbed the door handle, fumbling in my pocket for my keys. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped them on the ground. Damn it! I snatched them up and managed to unlock the door. As I climbed in, I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. The trench-coated figure stood in the middle of the street about a block back, perfectly still, just watching me. Even from this distance, I could feel those deep-set eyes locked on mine. I jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I threw the truck into drive and hit the gas, not caring about the rough terrain. The tires spun on loose gravel before catching, and I accelerated down the dirt road that had brought me here. I kept checking the mirror, but the figure was gone, and soon Millbrook disappeared behind me. The dirt road eventually connected to a county road, and I pushed my truck as fast as I dared on the uneven surface. I didn't slow down until I hit the highway, and even then, I stayed well above the speed limit. I kept expecting to see the trench coat in my rearview mirror somehow, but there was nothing but empty road behind me. About 20 miles from Millbrook, I spotted a gas station and pulled in. My hands were still shaking as I parked next to the building. I needed to catch my breath and figure out what the hell was happening. I turned off the engine and sat there, trying to process everything. A dead photographer with a bullet in his head. A man in a trench coat who appeared in my photos before I saw him in person. And now I was running like a scared kid. My camera. The photos would prove I wasn't crazy. I lifted the Nikon from around my neck and turned on the display. I scrolled back to the pictures I'd taken in the first house, where I'd initially spotted the figure. But as I stared at the image, my blood went cold. The doorway where I'd seen the trench-coated man was empty. Just a dark, vacant doorway. I frantically flipped through more images. The living room where he'd been behind the couch. The backyard where he'd stood watching through the window. The church pew where he'd sat with his head bowed. Nothing. Every single image showed empty buildings, no figure, no man in a trench coat. My hands were really shaking now. I scrolled to the last photo I'd taken, the one in the church where I'd pointed my camera directly at the man standing at the altar. The photo showed an empty church, just the altar and the pews. Nothing else. "What the hell?" I whispered. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd photographed. I set the camera down on the passenger seat and rubbed my eyes. This wasn't possible. I'd seen him, both in the photos and in person. And there was still Eli Reynolds' body in that church, real and solid and definitely dead. I needed to call the police. Whatever was happening in Millbrook, a man was dead, and I couldn't just drive away and pretend I hadn't seen anything. I pulled out my phone. Still no service. But the gas station would have a phone. I took a deep breath and grabbed my camera again, then stepped out of the truck to find a phone and call the Missouri State Police about the body I'd found. I sat in the gas station parking lot, staring at my phone. No service still, of course. My hands were shaking a little as I got out of the truck and headed inside. The place was empty except for a guy behind the counter, maybe 50, with a salt and pepper mustache. He looked up from his magazine when I walked in. "You got a phone I could use?" I asked. "Need to call the police." His eyebrows went up. "Everything all right?" "No," I said. "I found a body in Millbrook." He put his magazine down. "A body? Jesus." He pointed to an old corded phone on the wall. "That'll work. You want me to call for you?" "I got it, thanks." I picked up the receiver and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, and I told her what I'd found. "Sir, can you repeat the location?" she asked. "Millbrook. It's an abandoned town about 20 miles west of here. There's a body in the church, gunshot to the head." She asked for my name and number, then told me to wait there for officers to arrive. I hung up and leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling exhausted. The guy behind the counter pushed a cup of coffee toward me. "On the house." I took it. "Thanks. Millbrook, huh? Ain't been nobody living there for decades." "Yeah, well, somebody died there. Recently." He shook his head. "Bad business." I sipped the coffee and waited. About 30 minutes later, 2 Missouri State Police cruisers pulled into the lot. 4 officers got out, 2 in each car. I went outside to meet them. The lead officer, a tall guy with a crew cut, introduced himself as Sergeant Wallace. His partner was Officer Chen. The other 2 were Ramirez and Dawson. "You're Daniel Brown?" Wallace asked. "Yeah." "You reported finding a body?" I nodded. "In Millbrook." "In the church. What were you doing out there?" Chen asked. She had her notebook out. "I'm a photographer. I was taking pictures of abandoned places." Wallace looked at my camera. "And you found someone?" "Yeah, in the minister's office, off the main chapel. Male, 30s, gunshot to the head. Small caliber, I think. Clean hole." "You seem to know something about gunshot wounds," Ramirez said. "I was in Afghanistan. 2 tours. I've seen gunshot wounds." Wallace nodded. "You get ID on the victim?" "Eli Reynolds, from Kansas City. I found his wallet. His driver's license expired 2 days ago." They exchanged glances. Chen wrote it down. "Anyone else out there with you?" Wallace asked. I hesitated. "I saw someone. A man, tall, wearing a trench coat." "You saw him clearly?" Yeah, in the church. He was standing at the altar. I took a picture of him. Can we see it? Chen asked. I looked away. It's, complicated. I'll explain later. Wallace studied me. Was this person threatening? Did they chase you? Yes, I ran. He followed me through several buildings. I managed to get back to my truck and get away. Did he have a weapon? I didn't see one, but with Eli having a gunshot wound. Right. Wallace turned to Ramirez and Dawson. You two head out to Millbrook, find the church, secure the scene. We'll be right behind you. The two officers nodded and got back in their cruiser, pulling out of the lot. Mr. Brown, Wallace said, we need you to give us detailed directions. I described the route to Millbrook, mentioned the water tower where I'd parked, and explained how to find the church. And we'll need a formal statement from you, Chen added. We went inside the gas station, and I sat at a small table in the corner. Chen took notes while I went through the whole thing again, finding Millbrook, exploring the houses, discovering Eli's body, seeing the man in the trench coat, and running back to my truck. I left out the part about seeing the figure in my photos before seeing him in person, and I didn't mention how he disappeared from the photos afterward. They already looked skeptical. If I told them everything, they'd think I was crazy. So you received an anonymous email with coordinates to this town? Chen asked. Yeah, Tuesday morning. And you just went? Without knowing who sent it? I shrugged. I'm a photographer. It sounded interesting. The email said, the most haunting shots you'll ever take. Wallace read from Chen's notes. That didn't strike you as suspicious? I thought it was just someone being dramatic about an abandoned town. Wallace nodded. We'll need to see that email. Sure, when I get internet access. And this man you saw, can you describe him in detail? I shifted in my seat. Tall, thin, long dark coat, gaunt face, deep-set eyes. I didn't get a great look. But you said you took a picture of him, Chen said. I did. I trailed off. Wallace leaned forward. Mr. Brown, is there something you're not telling us? I rubbed my eyes. Look, I know what I saw, but the picture, it doesn't show him. What do you mean? I mean he's not there, in any of the photos. Places where I saw him, the photos just show empty rooms. They exchange that look again, the one cops give when they think someone's lying or crazy. We'll need to see those photos, Wallace said. Yeah, I'll show you. But first, please, just go check on Eli. He's been there at least a couple days. Wallace nodded. We'll head there now. Can we get your contact information? We'll probably need to speak with you again. I gave them my cell number and the name of a motel I'd passed about 5 miles back. I'll get a room there tonight, I said. Don't leave the area, Wallace said. It wasn't quite an order, but it wasn't a suggestion either. I won't. They headed out to their cruiser. I watched them drive away, then got back in my truck and drove to the motel. It was a rundown place called the Pine Ridge Motel, just 6 rooms in a row with a small office at one end. I checked in, paid cash for 1 night, and took my gear to room 3. The room smelled like old cigarettes and cheap cleaner. I set my camera and laptop on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were still shaking. I opened my laptop, connected my camera, and started transferring the photos. While they loaded, I checked my email. The message with the coordinates was still there, sent from an address that was just a string of numbers at a generic domain. No name, no signature, just the coordinates and that line about the most haunting shots you'll ever take. The photos finished transferring. I opened the first one I'd taken of the bank building where I'd first noticed the figure in the doorway, empty, just like I'd seen on the camera at the gas station. I went through them all, one by one. The living room with the couch, the dining room with the fallen chair, the kitchen window looking out to the backyard, the church pew, The altar. All empty. I checked the metadata. None of the files had been altered. These were the original images straight from my camera. But I'd seen him. In the photos and in person. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gaunt face turning toward me at the altar. I kept checking my camera and hard drive, hoping the figure would reappear in the photos, proving I wasn't losing my mind. Around dawn, I gave up trying to sleep. I showered, changed clothes, and drove back to the gas station for coffee and something to eat. I was halfway through a stale Danish when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Brown, this is Officer Chen. We'd like to speak with you again. Are you still at that gas station? Yeah, I'm here. Did you find him, Eli? We'll discuss that when we see you. We'll be there in about 20 minutes. I hung up and waited, drinking more coffee to stay awake. When Wallace and Chen pulled up, I went outside to meet them. Did you find him? I asked again. Wallace nodded. We found Eli Reynolds in the church, exactly where you described. Gunshot wound to the head, just like you said. Thank God, I said. I was starting to think. He was reported missing from Kansas City a week ago, Chen said. Professional photographer, just like you. So what about the other guy, the man in the trench coat? Wallace shook his head. Mr. Brown, we found no evidence that anyone else had been in Millbrook recently. Just you and Reynolds. What? That's impossible. I saw him. He chased me. We searched the entire town, Chen said. There were no other vehicles, no footprints besides yours and the victims, nothing to indicate anyone else was there. But I saw him, I insisted. He was right there at the altar. You mentioned photographs, Wallace said. You said you took a picture of this person. I hesitated, then pulled out my camera. That's the weird thing. Look, I showed them the photo of the altar. I aimed right at him. He was standing right there. They both leaned in to look at the display. The altar was empty. I don't understand, Wallace said. You're saying there was someone standing there when you took this? Yes, and he was in other photos too, but now they're all empty. I scrolled through more images. See? This doorway. He was standing right here. And behind this couch. And at the top of these stairs. They looked at each other again. Mr. Brown, Chen said gently, when's the last time you slept? That's not it. I'm not hallucinating. He was there. Wallace cleared his throat. We'd like you to come back to Millbrook with us, show us exactly where you encountered this person. I stepped back. No way I'm going back there. It would help us understand. I told you what happened. I showed you the photos. Eli Reynolds is dead with a bullet in his head and someone else was there. Without evidence? I don't care about evidence. My voice was getting louder. I'm not going back there. It's not safe. Wallace sighed. Mr. Brown, we're trying to investigate a homicide. Your cooperation would be... I've cooperated. I reported it. I gave my statement. I showed you my photos, but I'm not going back there. I took another step back. Am I under arrest? No, Chen said quickly. We just need to understand what happened. I told you what happened. Believe me or don't. But I'm not going back to Millbrook. It's been 2 days since I talked to the cops about what happened in Millbrook. I'm sitting at my kitchen table, coffee getting cold in front of me. Haven't slept much. Every time I close my eyes, I see that gaunt face turning toward me in the church. My apartment feels different now. Too quiet. I keep checking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. I know that's stupid. I'm on the 3rd floor, door locked, chain on. Nobody's getting in here. But still, I've got my laptop open, external hard drive plugged in, been transferring all the photos from Millbrook, organizing them into folders. Main Street, residential area, the church. I named the last folder Eli. Felt like I owed him that much. I click through each photo, one by one. The bank building with its caved-in roof, the diner with broken windows, the house with the tipped-over chair. I'm looking for him, the man in the trench coat. But he's not there. Not in a single shot, just empty buildings full of dust and shadows. Come on, I mutter, zooming in on a dark corner where I swear I saw him standing. Nothing, just a pile of debris. I check the metadata on each photo. Nothing's been altered. The timestamps match when I took them. But the figure I saw so clearly, both in the photos and in person, is gone. I rub my eyes and take a sip of cold coffee. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. Except I didn't imagine Eli Reynolds with a bullet hole in his head. That was real enough. I open Chrome and type Millbrook, Missouri history in the search bar. The first few results are generic, just brief mentions in articles about ghost towns in the Midwest. I click on a link to a local history site. Millbrook, founded 1883 as a mining community. I skim through the basics. Lead mine opened in 1885. Town boomed in the early 1900s. Population peaked around 1,200 people. I scroll down further. Abandoned in 1972 following concerns about lead contamination and mine subsidence. There's a paragraph about how the mining company detected dangerous levels of lead in the groundwater. Another about how parts of the town started sinking as the old mine tunnels collapsed. The article mentions a government buyout. Most residents took the money and left. A few refused until a major subsidence event damaged several buildings on Main Street. After that, everyone cleared out. Nothing about murders. Nothing about a man in a trench coat. Nothing that explains what happened to Eli Reynolds or why someone would send me there. I try another search. Eli Reynolds photographer. This gets me more results. A website with his portfolio, landscapes, urban exploration, abandoned places. His Instagram account with 30,000 followers. A few articles where he's mentioned or interviewed about his work. One article from last year has a quote from him. "I'm drawn to places people have left behind." There's a story in every empty room. I stare at his picture next to the quote. Brown hair, friendly smile. Now he's another story in an empty room. I close the laptop and grab my phone. The detective gave me his card after our last conversation. Detective Morris. I dial the number. He answers on the third ring. Detective Morris. "This is Daniel Brown," I say, "the photographer who found Eli Reynolds in Millbrook." "Mr. Brown, I was planning to call you today. How can I help?" "I was wondering if there were any updates on the case." There's a pause. "We're still investigating. The autopsy confirmed cause of death as a single gunshot wound to the head. Time of death approximately 3 to 4 days before you found him." "Have you figured out why he was there?" "Actually, that's why I wanted to speak with you." His voice shifts, becomes more focused. "We found something interesting when we searched Mr. Reynolds' apartment. He received an anonymous email with coordinates to Millbrook, very similar to the one you received." My stomach tightens. What did it say? "The perfect location for your abandoned places series. Coordinates attached. No signature, sent from a temporary email address that no longer exists." I grip the phone tighter. "So, someone lured both of us there." "It appears that way. Mr. Brown, can you think of anyone who might have a connection to both you and Reynolds? Any mutual contacts in the photography world?" I think about it. Not really. I knew of his work, but we never met. We don't even live in the same city. What about competition? Any rivalries or disputes with other photographers? I almost laugh. No, I'm not that successful. I do commercial work to pay the bills and take landscape photos on the side. I'm not important enough to have rivals. Well, someone knew both of you and your interest in abandoned places. He pauses. "Mr. Brown, I'd ask that you don't leave town while our investigation continues. We may have more questions." "Sure, I'm not going anywhere." After we hang up, I sit there for a while, turning it all over in my head. Someone sent Eli to Millbrook, then sent me there days later. Why? To find his body? To end up like him? I spend the rest of the day going through more of my photos, checking news sites for any mentions of Millbrook or Eli Reynolds, but find nothing new. Around 6, I order pizza, barely taste it while I eat. It's getting dark outside when my laptop pings with a new email notification. I glance at the preview on my screen. No sender address. No subject line. My finger hovers over the trackpad. I shouldn't open it, but I do. The message contains a single line. "Thank you for finding him." The shots were haunting, weren't they? I slam the laptop shut and stand up so fast my chair falls backward. My heart's pounding in my chest. "Fuck this," I say out loud to my empty apartment. I delete the email without responding. Then I grab my duffel bag from the closet and start throwing clothes into it. I pack my camera gear more carefully, wrapping everything in t-shirts before putting it in my camera bag. I call my friend Mark, who lives across town. "Hey, can I crash at your place for a few days?" "Sure, man. Everything okay? I'll explain when I get there." I take one last look around my apartment, then grab my bags and head for the door. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened in Millbrook. Who killed Eli? Who the man in the trench coat was? Why I was sent there? But I know I don't want to be alone right now. As I lock my door, I think about what Eli said in that article. There's a story in every empty room. I just hope I'm not the next chapter in whatever story started in Millbrook.